Hello everyone, I'm Steve G for Steve G Fishing, and welcome to another one of my videos. In today's video, the title of this video is Working Baits in Heavy Grass and Heavy Hydrilla. So let's go ahead and get started. The first bait I recommend is the frog. The frog is a really good bait. It works good on that heavy matted hydrilla, and it works good in that real thick grass or around the lily pads. The frog lure, I like to use the one that has the flat tip right there on the mouth, and I can pop that, and it just pops as it's going through the water sitting on the hydrilla. This bait, you can cast it out and just let it sit, or you can give it a couple jerks. But this frog bait works really well in the heavy, thick hydrilla as well as the grass. Our next bait is going to be the plastic worm. Now, what I like to do is whenever I use the plastic worm, sometimes I like to leave the weight to where it's loose and it slides. Other times, I'll put a toothpick in there and then move it down to where it looks like that. Now, I recommend that if you're going to use a bullet weight on your worm, you don't want to use anything less than a quarter. That way you can move up, but you got to remember that hydrilla and that grass is really thick, and you want a lot of weight to get it down to the bottom. So always remember, nothing less than the 1/4 inch bullet head, and then you can just go up from there. But you want to be able to get that bait down in those holes of that hydrilla. That way you can get to where the fish are at. Remember the plastic worm with the bullet head. Now the other way you can work the plastic worm is you can take the bullet head off and you can leave it like this and just run it through the top of the hydrilla, and a lot of times that will set the strikes off and it gets the bass really interested. So remember the plastic worm. There's so many different ways you can fish this bait, and the plastic worm works really good in the morning as well as in the afternoon. Another good bait I like to use is I like to use the fluke. I like to use the Texas rig on the fluke, and I just give that jerks and it zigzags through the hydrilla or in and out on the lily pads. But remember the fluke. The fluke is a really good bait to use in the heavy grass and the heavy hydrilla. Let's go to the next bait. The next bait I like to use is the trusty Rapala, nicknamed as the injured minnow. I can work this in the morning through the top of that hydrilla or in that heavy grass, and for some reason this always sets the strikes off. It looks just like a minnow, and when you're jerking it, it works like an injured minnow, but it's a good bait. It works really good in the morning as well as the afternoon. So remember, the Rapala works really good for heavy hydrilla and in the grass. Another good bait is the jig and pig. Whenever I flip with this jig and pig, I try to use as much weight as I can. I have a 3/8 on this, or I'll go with a 1/4, or I'll go with a 1/2. I use this a lot in the heavy grass, and it works really well as in the hydrilla. And I tell you, you want to get the jig and pig, and I've done videos on this. You want one that has that rattle in there, so it makes that clicking noise when it hits the bottom. And I tell you, this jig and pig really turns the bass on. They like that. I don't know what it is, but maybe it's just the way it looks. And I'll stick a trailer on there where I got the little flaps going off and on for the crawdad, and you'll see that in my other videos. But remember, the jig and pig is a really good bait for heavy hydrilla as well as thick grass. Let's go to the next bait. The next bait works really well in a hydrilla is, I call this the popper bait, known as the lunker lure. And this thing here just pops as you're reeling it across the water. You want to reel it slow or you want to reel it fast. But this is called also the lunker lure. This bait has caught a lot of fish, works really well in the heavy matted hydrilla as well as in the heavy grass. So remember, the lunker lure. It works really well for that thick stuff. Another bait is you want to go with the spinner bait. The spinner bait, you don't want to vote that out of the circle. The spinner bait works really good and that heavy thick stuff, and you can run it into the holes of that hydrilla and bring it back up. I usually hop it up and down through the hydrillas. I'll cast it out, I'll let it sink, and then I'll reel it back up and then let it sink. Or you can just run it straight, going slow. Or the other way you can run it is you can run it on top of the water where you have the blades spinning and they're just kind of flapping on the top of the surface. But remember, the spinner bait is also a really good bait for heavy hydrilla as well as the thick grass. Now I have the kids that come up to me sometimes when they're on the water and they say, "Steve, I don't have all that money to buy all these baits. Is there any way I could narrow it down to one bait?" And I said, yes. The number one bait that you want to use in the state of Florida is the plastic worm. I like using it with the bullet head, and I tell you, I can flip this bait, I can cast it, retrieve it slow, jerk it off the bottom, or I can take the weight off and reel it on top of the surface. If I had one bait to use in my tackle box and all my baits were gone, it would be the plastic worm. The plastic worm is the all-around bait for fresh water, and it's always has turned the bass on. It's never let me down. So remember, the all-around bait is the plastic worm. Well, these are the baits that I've shown you. Get out there and catch a big bass and enjoy the fun. Remember to take a kid fishing sometime when you get a chance. I'm Steve G for Steve G Fishing. God bless, and I hope to see you on my next video.